Hey, good morning, everyone. Happy Thursday morning to you. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And this will be the last specific response to Dr. David Hester's 23 affirmative arguments that he gave in machine gun style fashion in our formal debate July 14th and the 15th, 2016 at the Preterist Pilgrim Weekend here in Ardmore, Oklahoma. I've gone over somewhat in depth, not really deep, but somewhat in depth, demonstrating that Dr. David Hester's 23 arguments are, to say the very least, weak. They are presuppositional, they are eisegetic. Not one time, listen to me very carefully, not one time did Dr. David Hester go to a text like I did with Romans 11 and demonstrate from that text that what he was claiming about that text has to be true. He made assertions about passages. He never exegeted passages. He assumed that, for instance, when Jesus said that he would raise up the righteous at the, quote, last day, unquote, well, Dr. David Hester assumed that has to be the last day of time. Well, we talked about that in our last video. The Bible affirms that the Christian age has no end. Folks, pardon me, how can that which has no end come to an end, as Dr. David Hester affirms? You see, that's a contradiction. It's a direct violation of what the Bible says. Well, let's take a look at this concept very quickly of the end. Because after all, Dr. Hester is affirming the end. In Matthew chapter 24, verse 3, after Jesus has predicted the fall of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple, the disciples ask, "Tell us, when shall these things be? What shall be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" Well, here's the end of the age. Now remember, the Christian age has no end. If the Christian age has no end, the disciples are not asking about the end of the age. If the Christian age has no end, the disciples were not asking about the end of time. And by the way, Jesus has just predicted the destruction of the temple. What age did that temple represent? It did not represent the Christian age. Why would the disciples, upon what remotely logical connection would the disciples link the end of the Christian age, which has not at that time even been established? Why would the disciples link the destruction of that Jerusalem temple, which represented the Mosaic age, with the end of the Christian age that had not even been established yet? Do you see the utter illogic of an argument like that? Okay, so Jesus predicted the destruction of the temple. The disciples ask about the end of the age as a direct result of that prediction. Jesus gives them signs of the end of the age. One of those signs was this gospel of the kingdom must be preached into all of the world as a witness to the nations, then comes the end. Well, what is the only end that has been discussed in the text? The end of the age. The end of the age represented by that temple. There's the end. Not only that, in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, Paul, speaking of the resurrection of John 6:39 through 44, the resurrection of John 5:28 and 29, he said that Christ was the first fruits of the resurrection, and he says, then comes the end when he has put down all rule, all authority. Okay. In chapter 10, Paul had said, the end of the ages has come upon us. There's the end, and the time had arrived. And in 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 5, Peter said Christ was ready, from the Greek word hitoimos, which means not only morally prepared, but temporally ready, standing on the point of doing something. Christ was ready to judge the living and the dead. Now watch this. Verse 7, the end of all things. Oh my goodness. Isn't it fascinating that Dr. David Hester says, well, the last day must be a reference to the last day of time. Okay, then is it the end of all things? The end of time? Isn't it the end of the Christian age? No, Christian age has no end. But watch what Peter says. The end of all things has drawn near. And do you know what David Hester did in our debate when I pointed this out? He tried to delineate between verse 5 and verse 7. Even if 1 Peter chapter 4 refers to AD 70, Dr. Hester admitted, that doesn't mean it's restricted to that. Really? It is, in fact, the judgment of the living and the dead is at the end of all things. There's no question about this. This was just absolute, utter desperation on David Hester's part. So we come to the end of our review and refutation of Dr. Hester's 23 arguments. In the next couple of videos, I'm just simply going to give a summation. I'm going to sum up what we have seen in our review and refutation and response to Dr. David Hester's 23 arguments. You really have to grasp, you have to catch the power of how genuinely weak, genuinely presuppositional, genuinely illogical, genuinely wrong Dr. David Hester's arguments truly are. And don't forget, we now have DVDs and MP3s of the entire debate, plus all of the lectures that were given at the seminar. Look, folks were absolutely raving about some of the speeches, all of them actually, that were given. So you need to get a copy of this. Go to my website, eschatology.org, BibleProphecy.com, and order the book, The Resurrection of Daniel, chapter 12, verse 2, Fulfilled or Future, and make a mention that you saw the offer on YouTube or Facebook, and I'll refund your shipping. Also, send me an email and ask how you can get your own copy, how you can order your own copy of the 2016 Preterist Pilgrim Weekend and the formal debate between myself and Dr. Hester, as well as some really, really wonderful speeches by the speakers at that time. Hey, thanks so much for joining me for this morning's Morning Musings. Hope you have an absolutely fantastic weekend. Lord willing, we'll see you on Monday.